I kept thinking the tunnel would save me because I understood it. I knew which fans could run for hours without heat issues, which breaker panels had sloppy crimp jobs from the last subcontractor, which access doors had bad hinges that liked to catch and shriek if you opened them fast. Before the world turned, my days were a loop of pressure tests, filter changes, and work orders that no one read. After the first week of panic on the surface, the loop became survival. I stopped logging hours. I started logging air quality and fuel levels. I am the one who welded shut the service gates on the East Drift and locked the ramp bollards in place. I rerouted the emergency fans so we drew air through 2 banks of filters instead of 1. I ripped out a maintenance station that once held a broken coffee machine and hung blackout curtains to make a small room. A rolling cart became a table. A tarp on pallets became a bed. It was not comfortable, but it was stable. Stability changes how a person thinks. When the first group found me, I said nothing about staying. I just walked them through the rules. Do not touch the control panels. Do not wander past the orange tape lines. Do not stand under the jet fans when they cycle. Keep voice volume low because sound travels farther underground than a person expects. I checked shoes at the door and washed hands with a bottle of sanitizer I had hoarded in a drawer since flu season. A woman with a toddler nodded with the flat focus of a person who had run out of options. An ex-cop with a stitched eyebrow watched everything and said he could take shifts. A nurse checked the toddler for a fever using the back of her hand and shot me a glance that said she was not done leaving hospitals behind. We learned the dance of the tunnel together. We learned how the lights hum when the generator is happy, and how the hum changes to a harsher buzz when a belt starts to glaze. We learned that, at night, the surface turns quiet in a way that makes the tunnel feel louder. We learned how to time the fans so our section stays under slight negative pressure. That keeps a faint inward breeze through seams and door cuts, which tells me if a seal is turning bad long before a meter does. The work turned into a routine. The routine turned into something that felt like a village. People built shelves from highway signs. Someone found a bucket of chalk and drew numbers over the doors. The kids slept with ear protection and a stuffed moose. We did not let any infected get close to our doors. The ramp barricades were heavy, and the tunnel walls gave us a clean line. Sound discipline mattered more than force. Infected drifted past if we killed the generator for a minute and went silent. Bodies do not notice what they cannot hear. If a straggler wandered near, Carter, the ex-cop, stepped out with a pole we made from a conduit and a sharpened bracket. He worked with economy. No one turned it into a sport. We cleaned up after quietly and logged it, then checked if the fans pulled any smell into the intakes. On the 4th week, the power began to flicker. It started with a soft stutter in the work lights that made faces twitch and shoulders tighten. I walked the short hall to the breaker room with a flashlight and a tool bag. I could have done it blind from memory, but I do not trust memory when the stakes are real. The door to the breaker room is stubborn. I always have to lean into it and hook it with my boot before it swings wide. The smell hit first. Not the sweet rot we get near the west ramp gates when the wind brings something dead. This was sharp, chemical, oily. I tracked it to the return duct by the floor. I shined the beam across the grate and saw claw marks in the dust line where the metal had been dragged by something with hands that did not care about cuts. There was black residue streaked along the bottom edge, not soot from the generator. Not the graphite grease I keep in a marked tub. This had grit in it. I rubbed a little between 2 fingers and felt grit and something sticky. Road grime mixed with some stain I could not place. It did not smell fresh. It smelled old, stale, carried on shoes or skin. I followed the smear with the flashlight until it vanished under the duct lip. I do not panic when I see something new. I start with air. I watched the ribbon I taped to the grill months ago. It fluttered inward the way it should. The negative pressure held. Nothing was pushing air out of that duct toward us. That gave me room to think. I radioed Carter to meet me at the breaker room and told everyone else to hold position and keep voices down. He arrived fast and quiet, carrying the pole in one hand and a small can of red spray paint in the other. We had a system. Red paint marks places that need a second look after a sweep. He capped the can and listened. "Animals?" he asked. "Could be," I said, "but the residue's wrong, and the claw marks are spaced like fingers, not paws." He did not argue. He lifted the pole and rapped the duct. The sound came back dull because of the dust and the angle. He rapped again on the wall near the duct. That brought a hollow ring. I marked it in my head. Behind that wall runs the maintenance shaft that ties into the old east drift. We sealed that drift with plate and welds in the first week. We did not seal every splice and old branch because we did not have infinite steel. We made choices, fast and pragmatic, based on schematics that had been revised by crews who liked to improvise. The tunnel is old. Old things carry history in corners that do not look important until they are. The lights stuttered again. Not a full drop, just a sag that flicked the fluorescent fixtures. I opened the breaker panel and found heat where there should have been only warm metal. The feed from the generator was fine. The bus bars were fine. The problem sat downstream. I traced the line with my fingers and found a breaker with a vibration more than I wanted. That means load cycling. That means something big in the system is turning on and off in a short window. I shut down the non-essential load, then told Mina, the nurse, to pull the fridge into the low-duty circuit. She did it fast, no fuss. The lights steadied. After, I pulled the duct grill and checked for blockage. No rat droppings, no nests, just a smear that receded into the dark. I slid the flashlight into the space and saw the little welded tag I had installed months ago to remind me where the duct turns. The smear continued past the turn. I slid my arm farther until my knuckles scraped metal. The smear had depth. Whatever made it had more on it than dust. I cut a patch from a furnace filter and taped it across the grill opening. If the smear carried spores or fine grit, I wanted it caught. I told Carter to stick with me and told the rest to check the kids, check the fuel gauge, and keep the generator breathing clean. Then we went to the east service door. The east service door is flagged with 3 chalk lines, which means no one opens it alone. The lock is old and wants to jam if you rush the key. I set my shoulder to it and eased it inward. The corridor beyond drops in temperature, even when the main section is warm. We ran 2 work lights off a battery pack and set them facing down the shaft. The light traveled 20 feet, hit dust, and turned to haze. We kept voices low because the shaft acts like a horn. Any sound travels and rounds corners where ears cannot tell distance. We moved slow enough to keep our feet under us and fast enough not to start second-guessing every shadow. The smear on the duct in the breaker room had a cousin here on the wall at ankle height. It ran along for 10 feet, then jumped up to shin height. Someone crawled here at some point, then stood. I tested the floor with the tip of the pole at each seam. A ladder well gaped on the right under a hatch. It was open an inch. I put my hand on the hatch, felt old grit, and pushed it down. The hinge creaked, and both of us froze. From somewhere farther in, faint, something moved. Not steps, not a voice. More a brush, a scrape of something against metal in a short burst, and then still. Carter looked at me, and I counted with my fingers. 1, 2, 3. We waited. No response. He tapped the wall once with the pole. I eased the work light to the seam line and ran a mirror past it. The mirror showed only more wall and a pipe chase. We advanced to a bend and found a maintenance bay I had not seen in years. Old mophead in the corner, a broken handcart tipped on its side, a line of chalk on the floor that had collected dust. My old supervisor's handwriting used to mark lines exactly like that during maintenance season when he staged equipment. The smear ran to the far wall, up the baseboard, and vanished behind a panel that covered a branch duct. I put my ear to it. My ear caught air moving slow, not from our fans. A leak somewhere pulled air past this panel. I set the light low and looked for fasteners. 4 screws along the top had been replaced by different heads. That means someone took this panel off with a wrong tool and ran out of matching parts. The bottom had original screws. Dust stood up around the screw heads. No one had moved those in a while. The wrong screws stood clean in a circle where someone's hand had smudged the dust recently. I counted possible reasons. Scavengers sometimes come through old access points. They take copper or fuel or anything that looks useful. A survivor who did not know our section was occupied could have probed for a quiet place to sleep. Infected do not unscrew panels with a screwdriver. A person did this, a person with greasy hands. "Let me hold the pole," Carter said. He planted the tip, got a firm stance. I backed the screws out slowly. The panel sagged, and a rush of air pulled dust into the opening. I swallowed and listened. Nothing moved inside. I lifted the panel off with a grunt. My light caught a short crawl space and a second panel beyond. This one cut by hand out of something that used to be a road sign. I knew the font and the shape. Someone had cut a sign down, drilled holes, and wedged it in place to hide the opening. A neat job, if not official. I have seen this once before in another city. When crews decommission sections, a person living rough will claim a pocket and make it home. The pocket becomes a warren of tarps, cheap locks, and hand-cut vents. If he was here before the outbreak, he might still be here, or he left marks and an odor that lingered. I hate surprises inside ventilation. Surprises inside ventilation make people sick. I angled the light through the gap and called out in a normal voice that carried and did not sound like a bark. I said, "We are here to check the duct. We want to pass through, and we will leave food in the corner if someone lives here and does not want to talk." Silence. Then a whisper of fabric on metal and a soft thump. The sound came from farther in, past the hand-cut panel. Carter set his jaw and nodded once. I used a nut driver to take out the screws holding the hand-cut panel. The tool made a small rasp each time it turned. The panel came away without a fight. The crawl space opened into a low passage that sloped down. The air coming out was cool and carried a stale scent that sat in a person's sinuses and refused to leave. I handed Carter the light and slid forward on my hips. He kept the pole under my shoulder in case anything rushed. We went 5 feet, then 10. The passage widened slightly and dropped into a space that had once been a staging room for cables. The racks were stripped. In the middle sat a layout of rags, a sleeping roll, a bucket, and 2 cans stacked on each other with twine wound around both. I stared at that twine. It was new. Something moved behind the rack. I turned the light and caught a face. A man, beard overgrown, eyes wide, mouth open. His skin had a dust mask outline. He blinked fast. He raised one hand in a slow movement and spread his fingers. Behind him, deeper in the pocket, something banged and scuttled. He flinched and looked down. He did not look at us. Not really. He looked at the pole. The pole makes people nervous. It tells a story before we speak. I wired the fans, I said, keeping my voice even. I want to know what is hitting the power. He swallowed. The sound of his swallow bounced. He pointed to the back where the scuttling came from. I eased the light that way. The beam found a section of duct mesh peeled back, and a dark shape pressed into it. Movement made the mesh click. The shape had the wrong rhythm to be a person in control. The man said one word. Stuck. He said it quiet, almost to himself, as if the word would change the shape. We did not go closer. Carter kept the pole down and to the side. How many? He asked. The man lifted 2 fingers, then shook his head and lifted 3. His eyes did not leave the mesh. There was a faint, wet hiss from somewhere past the shape, like someone trying to breathe in a bad way. I backed the light off the face of the shape. Infected will lunge at light. That seems to be a pattern. Keep the light on the edges, and they do not always react. What is the residue? I asked. He lifted his hands and rubbed thumb and finger together. Sealant, he said, from the joints. I used it to plug gaps. Kept me from smelling the surface when I needed to sleep. He licked his lips. I have been here since before the city went quiet. I worked a night crew. I knew places to hide. I also knew which doors to avoid when sirens got bad. His voice had the flat tone of a person who had talked to himself more than to others for a long time. I asked him if he had been tapping the breakers. He shook his head hard. They hit the fans, he said, nodding toward the mesh. They push in when they surge. Trips the breaker. I jammed 2 with lumber. It held until last night. Now it made sense. He had been using the ducts to move and had jammed old dampers to control his own airflow. When the infected pressed into one, the motor surged, the breaker threw, and our lights stuttered. I told him we needed to clear the blockage and reset the damper. He closed his eyes and nodded once. Help me move, he said, and his voice moved up a notch into something sharp with effort. We stepped forward together. The mesh bowed as something pressed against it with sudden force. The man recoiled and hit the rack. The cans on the twine knocked each other and rang. From the dark past the mesh, a second form shifted and pushed. Both pressed at the same time. The mesh slid with a screech. Their faces hit the open gap and worked against the metal, mouths opening and closing in an ugly, blind search for purchase. Carter stepped in. He set the pole under the bottom edge of the mesh and levered up to seat it into the lip of the duct. The man moved to the side and braced the rack with his back. I grabbed the free edge, dragged it to the bolt hole, and drove a screw into the lip with the driver in a single, long, careful turn that threw sparks. The shapes worked against the barrier and left streaks of the same black residue. The driver slipped once and the bit chewed my knuckle. I did not stop. The screw bit. I ran another screw in at the top, then another at the bottom. We held the mesh until the pressure changed. The forms receded, not by choice. The fans upstream kicked to a higher duty because Mina had followed a protocol we drilled. When the lights flicker twice, purge cycle. The extra negative pressure pulled the bodies away from the mesh by inches. We took those inches and set 2 more screws. The mesh held. It was not a fix. It was a pause. Back in the main tunnel, I cut power to the downstream section and opened the damper housing with a hex. Inside, the damper blades were bent where a weight had hit them. We would need to straighten them and reseat the motor shaft. I radioed Mina and told her to prep masks, not the paper kind, the rubber kind with straps, and to get the kid behind the second door. Purge cycles can drag smell through channels in ways I do not fully control, and I do not take chances with children's lungs. The man who had been living in our walls stood at the threshold and watched our room with the look of a raccoon watching a kitchen from a porch. His hands trembled in short movements he tried to hide. I handed him a wrapped bar and a bottle of water without making eye contact. That was not a kindness. That was protocol. If he stayed, he needed to eat in sight, so we knew the food did not vanish into stash spots. If he left, he needed calories for the trip. He tore the wrapper clumsily, then slowed and forced his hands steady. We reset the damper motor with Carter holding the blades flat, and me working the set screw on the shaft. The motor kicked and turned with a healthy whir. I cycled it by hand through the bypass, then let it run for 30 seconds. The breaker held, the lights steadied, the generator tone smoothed. I could feel the room settle even without seeing faces. A steady tone tells everyone we have a grip on the system. A steady tone keeps conversations short and quiet. The man said his name is Ellis. He worked janitorial in a subcontractor that lost a bid and never told anyone. He slept in his van and knew each exit that would not get him noticed. When the city started to cough and the cops started to block access roads, he went down instead of up and took one room at a time. He did not want to stay with us. His eyes kept tracking the door. He had his own network of pockets. He asked for sealant and a flashlight battery. I gave him sealant and a small battery pack, then drew a map of the branch we had welded and the ones we left under a plate. He traced the lines with a finger and nodded slowly. He told me he had heard movement months before we arrived. Not infected, not steady. Something that did not want to share. He had avoided those sections by marking the air with strong vinegar and seeing where the smell went. He laughed at himself and stopped midway through the laugh. I walked him to the service door. He paused and looked back down the hall. "You keep it balanced," he said. "Air, light, rules. That is more than most." Then he glided into the shaft and vanished in 3 steps. The quiet he left behind rang. We worked through the next hours on a schedule. Purge with the upwind fans to lift and disperse smell in the old pockets. Close the fire dampers on lines that connect to the east drift. Post a rope at the service door in case anyone calls in a hurry. Check the backup generator and run it under load for a minute to keep it honest. Eat. Drink water. Claim 2 hours of sleep in shifts because no system stays stable if the operator runs dry. The kid woke twice and asked where the moose was. Mina held the plush in plain view and talked softly about breakfast. Carter checked the pole with an organized boredom that meant he would not miss a single loose bolt. I checked the breaker room again and wiped the smear from the duct with a rag I threw in a sealed bag, because my brain refuses to let anything uncertain sit near food. I taped a fresh ribbon to the grill and watched it flutter. The airflow stayed true. An hour into second shift, a new sound reached us. Not fans, not generator, a tapping in a triple pattern from far east. I killed our light for 3 seconds. In the dark, the tap sounded again. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause. Not a coincidence. Carter lifted an eyebrow. We both ran the same memory. Old maintenance crews used triple taps when voice would bring dust down. I brought the light back and kept it low. We did not answer with taps. We answered with position. We moved to the east service door and listened. The taps shifted to the south wall. I stepped close and caught a faint breath through a hairline seam. I reached up, found the old pry slot, and eased the plate back a finger's width. A face pressed into the gap. not infected. Eyes clear, skin waxy from underground living. A woman whispered that a side corridor had collapsed under a stack of old conduit. She had a friend trapped beyond, still talking but fading. She had followed Ellis's chalk marks. She knew his name. She begged to use our jack. She offered cash, jewelry, a family photo, anything. I told her to stop offering and start pointing. We do not do rescues without a plan. We do not leave a person talking behind a wall either. Carter took the pole and a pry bar. I took the bottle jack and a short run of chain. Mina grabbed a first aid kit and a thermal blanket. We killed half the work lights to cut our profile. The four of us moved through the open plate and into a pocket that stank of old concrete dust and stepped up human stress. The woman led, moving with nervous economy. She took us to a T-junction where a section of conduit had come down in a neat stack. The stack pinned a man's leg under weight he could not lift. He kept his voice steady by effort. He introduced himself as Mark. He said he was fine, which was a lie he needed to speak. We took the weight off his leg in stages. Jack the lowest point. Chain the top run of pipe to the rack. Spread the load with a plank so the jack foot did not punch through. Carter called the rise in inches. Mina watched Mark's face. Not for drama, but for color and a tightness around the eyes that means the world is trying to narrow. We slid his leg out when the gap hit 4 inches. He bit down on a strip of cloth and did not make a sound that would spook anyone behind any wall. Mina wrapped the leg, checked toes, asked him to move them. He did. Good news can land without celebration. On the way back, I noticed a draft that did not line up with any fan schedule. I stopped. I held my hand to a seam. The draft moved against the cadence of our purges. That means a parallel space breathing. I marked it with paint and rubbed the edge. The paint came away on black residue. Same grit, same stickiness. The woman saw me touch it and frowned. That smell has been here since before the dead started wandering, she said. You can taste it in your teeth when you sleep. Back at our door, we brought Mark in and set him on the pallet bed. The kid watched from behind a curtain with one eye and the moose's ear jammed into his mouth. Mina gave Mark water and a small pain pill. He swallowed with gratitude and caution. Carter pulled out a map I had drawn and pointed. Here, he said, tapping the seam we found. There is a space that pulls air. If we do not look, it will look at us first. We built a plan in efficient parts. Secure our air, secure our doors. Walk the seam with chalk and grease to find any other draws. If the space is small, fill it with foam and scrap. If the space is large, mark an exclusion and post it. Bad systems die when operators try to seize every inch. We would not turn the tunnel into a war on shadows. We would fix what we could and set boundaries around the rest. Before we moved, I took the old maintenance radio I kept for parts and put fresh cells in it. I tuned it to the channel the road crews once used on graveyard shift. I keyed it and set a call sign no one had used in years. Static answered. Then a voice scraped through, clipped and thin. Control, it said. This is Boxcar at the island end. Fans are doing a dance I do not like. You running a purge pattern? I stared at the radio and felt an old world tilt back into place for 1 second. Those words meant there were people at the far end of the tunnel running their own playbook, watching their own gauges. I keyed back. Purge with purpose, I said. We had a damper hit, reset and holding. A pause. Then the voice came back stronger. We have families in the West Boars. We heard taps in the night 2 days running. Thought it was pipes until now. You got visitors? Yes, I said. "We have an Ellis and a collapse rescue. We also have old pockets breathing in odd ways." A second voice cut in, a man with a smoker's rasp smoothed out by the radio. "I know those pockets," he said. "Back when we poured the new liner, we left more holes than the paperwork admits. You want a clean map? You need old-timers, and half of them are gone or sitting up top wishing for power that does not exist." He coughed. "But I am here. I can walk you through a thing or two." We set the radio on the table and put the speaker low. He described a blind chamber on our side, built to stage cable drums during a winter job. The crew sealed it with a road sign panel because the right plate was delayed and the supervisor wanted to go home. He described a warren behind it, half collapsed, that looped around into a sump room that no one had ever properly pumped. He advised against opening anything that smelled of sweet damp. Not poison, just a recipe for infection and regret. He said the East Drift ties into that warren with a hand-dug splice someone did on a weekend for scrap. He named the person. He swore at his memory for keeping that name when so many others had slipped. We took his directions and walked the seam again. The chalk line crossed 3 points where the air drew in. We could not foam all 3 without risking pressure changes we did not understand. We chose one and sealed it by stuffing a rag and spraying sealant around the edges, then tagging it with a date. We left the other 2 open, but screened with mesh we screwed into place with self-tappers. Not a perfect fix, but a way to control flow. The residue showed under the mesh in a skim. I wiped it with a fresh rag and sealed that rag too. Habits keep people alive. At dusk, meaning the hour when surface noise drops and cold air runs down the ramps, we heard an echo of feet in the far west ramp. Not a crowd, not a single runner. 2 sets, measured, stopping often. We doused the big lights and kept one low. We waited with the radio off. The steps paused just before our line of barricades and then retreated. No scrape of hands, no breath, no drum of panic. Carter tilted his head. "Scouts," he said. He did not need to add human. Human scouts mean trouble later if curiosity turns mercenary. The tunnel's gifts, air, water, a fixed roof, are worth trouble. I walked the barricade line and checked the bolt tension. I set 2 more caltrops in the shadow where a foot might land if a person stepped without a light. I do not want blood here. I want warning. I clipped 2 glow sticks to a wire and ran it across the floor at ankle height. If someone hits it, the sticks crack and light the floor. It is cheap and it works. Ellis returned after dark, meaning after the hour when the generator tone blends into your head and you forget it for stretches. He came to the edge of our light, set down a bag, and stepped back. In the bag were 2 spools of old copper wire, a small fire extinguisher, and a pack of masks still sealed. He said nothing about where he got them. He said only that the warren past the mesh is clear to the chamber after the sump if we keep the purge cycles steady. He asked for vinegar. I gave him half a bottle and a cloth. He smiled with half his mouth and left. We slept in shifts while the tunnel's new rhythm held. In the morning, meaning when a person above would call it morning by habit, not light, I checked the generator oil and tightened a belt that had started to shine. I changed one filter that had pulled in more fine dust than it should have. I marked the breaker that had stuttered and pressed a fingertip to the face of it every time I passed. It stayed cool. Around noon, meaning when stomachs start to remind people of meals, Mina brought me a cup of broth and asked if I planned to keep us underground for the season. I told her the truth. The tunnel buys time. It does not buy forever. Water makes metal rot, and concrete shifts when no one cares for it. We will keep it running until the risk of staying outweighs the risk of moving. That calculation changes each day." She nodded and said the kid asked if the sky still worked. I said we should show him a patch when the air is clear and the road is empty. A real horizon resets a brain. She smiled once and went back to her patients, which now included Mark and his leg, and a woman with a stress headache that made her eyes pinch. We went back to the mesh in the afternoon with a better fix. I brought a proper panel cut from good plate, drilled with exact holes and marked for future reference. We set it while the purge cycle pulled the smell off the faces pressing behind and away. The hands came once, a sudden reach that slapped at the barrier and scraped skin against metal, the residue printed in a black smear. I made a note to add a bleach wipe to the routine and to replace the panel sooner than later. Those small notes keep the system honest. Before sunset, the radio crackled with a message from the island end. The voice said 2 small boats had turned circles near the surface intake screen for the lake water. That intake is part of a system I do not control, but the lake gear sometimes wakes the tunnel when it cycles. The boats did not land. The voice said to watch for rope lines and hooks. People try things when they are hungry. We thanked them and agreed to use the triple taps if we needed a quiet signal. It felt good to have a code again. Night fell in the way it falls underground. Not with darkness, but with the shift in what makes sound. The fans became the loudest thing. Our own breathing dropped low. The kid finally slept without the moose in his mouth. Carter dozed in a chair with his boots off, but his socks on because he does not let his feet touch concrete without a barrier. I walked the corridor one more time with the flashlight off to keep my other senses honest. Air moved where it should move. Metal sat where I had left it. The ribbon on the grill in the breaker room fluttered, steady and small. I do not pretend we are safe. Safe is a word people use when they want to stop paying attention. The tunnel does not let a person stop paying attention. That is the one thing I am grateful for. The lights hum, the fans turn, the radio hisses, and now and then coughs up a voice that reminds me we are not the only ones who have refused to lie down. We have a plan for the next hour and a draft of a plan for the next day. We have a map that is wrong in places and getting better with each chalk line. We have screws that hold and a pole that waits under a chair. We have a rule about not shouting and another rule about not going alone into the parts of the tunnel that were never finished properly. We have broth and sleeping pallets, and a kid who will see the sky soon through a narrow, clean slice between 2 barricades. In the lower branch, something that used to be a person still presses against mesh. It leaves marks and then tires, and drifts back into the hollow where the air pulls hard. The residue dries and cracks if you leave it. I wipe it before it cracks. It is a small job, not the kind of job that wins praise, but it is the job that keeps the smell from teaching our noses the wrong lessons. The job never ends. I am fine with that. Work makes time pass without chewing the mind to pieces. Tomorrow, we will open the west plate for 20 minutes at dawn to show the kid the sky. We will do it after a sweep and during a purge, and with Carter standing 3 steps up with the pole, not to play hero, but to remind anyone watching from the shadows that our routine includes being hard to take from. We will take in the light and the air. Then we will close the door and go back to gauges and chalk and a steady generator tone. The tunnel holds because we hold it. I will keep holding it until the math changes. If the math changes, I will walk the map to a new box of air and start again. That is the plan. That is enough for now. An hour later, I hear 3 taps, then 3 more. I answer with 3. A pause, then a voice on the radio, quiet and clipped. "Heads up," he he says. Island End saw flashlights under the overpass. Not many. Smart. Watch your barricades. I key back, thank him, and set 2 more glow sticks on a wire near the floor. I check the screws on the plate we set over the mesh and check the ribbon on the grill. It flutters. The hum stays steady. The story continues because we work. That is the only reason we are still breathing air we know and trust.